Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialize in websites for counselors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counselors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hi, I'm Rory and welcome to episode 320 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. In this second part of our interview series, we are once again joined by Susie Jamieson, a BACP accredited psychotherapist, EFT practitioner, coach and trainer. In this concluding segment, Susie shares the rest of her story about navigating a client complaint. Now, if you'd like to listen to the first part of Susie's story, visit counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, and then look for episode 319. You can listen in to the first part of her story here. And with that, I'll hand you over to Ken.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 320 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Both myself, Ken Kelly, and Rory Oakes right here with you. Glad you've joined us. 3 topics today, starting with ethical sustainable practice, where today we're going to be delving into preparing the counselling environment for autism-friendly care. This continues our discussion on neurodivergence. We're then going to practice matters, where today we're looking at navigating client complaints. This is part 2 of Susie Jamieson's talk that she did. If you haven't caught up on part 1, go back to episode 319 and go and have a listen to that, because it is really worth your while. And if you are on a cliffhanger from last week of listening to Susie speak about the complaints procedure, you're going to get the resolution, the complete story today. So stick around for that. We then go into student services. This is where we see you, the students, on your formal journey to become a counsellor, psychotherapist. And today we're going to be speaking about something that is challenging. It's the skill of challenge. That's what we're going to be looking at today. And it is challenging, actually, the skill of challenge, but we'll get to that in a little while. Let's start off with our ethical, sustainable practice, preparing the counselling environment for autism-friendly care. What do we mean by that, Rory?
Well, I think that's a very good question. And I'm going to start off by saying that as therapists, we really have to have kind of 3 guiding lights when it comes to thinking about the care and service to our clients, and that is inclusivity and accessibility. So are we making sure that our environment and our offer is both inclusive and allows clients to access our service, which leads on to really making an effective therapeutic alliance. We should always have that in the front of our minds. How are we going to, best make a therapeutic alliance? Because the research is clear that it's the quality of the relationship that shows the best outcomes in therapy. And also that we have an ethical and professional responsibility to make sure that we're inclusive. So when we take those 3 ideas and put them across a therapeutic environment for people who are neurodivergent or autistic, what we need to think about is how we can make reasonable adjustments and respect the autonomy of the client. How can we make sure that client is treated as an individual with their own view of the world, And we do that by making reasonable adjustments. So if we have a client who says, look, I'm autistic. I recently spoke to someone, I interviewed someone who's autistic, and I just wrote back and said, is there any adjustments I can make for you? We're meeting on Zoom. Is there any adjustments I can make? And she wrote back, she said, thank you very much, ! Because someone had thought about the fact that she might have needed some reasonable adjustments. And I guess that puts us into a starting position, Ken. We're keeping these ideas in mind so that we can say to a client, okay, well, thank you for sharing that you're autistic. Is there anything I could do for you? Is there any adjustments I could put in place? What would make the environment more comfortable? I mean, a therapy shouldn't always be comfortable, but, level the playing field. What can we put in place to help you have an experience of the room, or if it's online, that feels safe and is adapted to you? Those are the starting positions, Ken.
I like it. I like how your starting position was in the very first email before meeting with the person. You were exploring what that looked like. And I like how you said level the playing field. So your first words were make the client feel comfortable. And I guess we do try to make them feel in a way welcomed and to a degree comfortable. But I know what you're saying when you say that therapy is not always a comfortable place to be. In fact, it's probably at its most effective, you're not very comfortable within
Yes.
that moment. There are times, of course. But I like how you use level the playing field. We had at one time, it was a little device. It was back when we lived in South Africa, and it was a little speaker. And apparently this speaker emitted a pitch that chased away mosquitoes, because we had a lot of mosquitoes. In some certain months, we would be bitten a lot. So we had this little thing on. And our daughter could hear the buzzing of the box. And she didn't like it. It was, for her, it was a very irritating and invasive sound. And both myself and my wife, we couldn't hear a thing. Because you're hearing changes as you go through your arc of life, and certain frequencies get cut off, and we turned it off for her. And that's leveling the playing field. It's being aware of that we might not be able to see, hear, smell, feel ourselves, but other people can, and it's being in their frame of reference. And of course, I'd like to just cover the learning outcomes that we're looking to get today. So by speaking about this topic, we hope that you will recognize common sensory and environmental challenges autistic clients face in neurotypical settings. We're going to try to identify and incorporate small yet significant adjustments to create a supportive, therapeutic environment. As you mentioned, Rory, these reasonable adjustments. And then we're going to employ adaptive communication and sensory strategies to enhance client engagement and comfort. So we are looking at that. And you've already spoken about respecting the autonomy of that client. They're reaching out to us right from the very beginning. We're exploring what would make them more comfortable, and being there ready to make those small adjustments. And what are some small adjustments that we might see, or that we might look at first, that are very common? And I'm going to go into, perhaps it's something around sound management. Maybe it's something around natural scents, or scents that you might purchase from a store that you put in your counselling room because it makes it smell nice and it makes it smell fresh. It might be adapting the lighting you have in your room, the lighting that you very specifically went and chose, maybe to because you think it makes your room look good, and it creates the right atmosphere. All of that is through us wanting to do the best. But then we go and re-look at that through the lens of what we learn around neurodivergent individuals and what their needs may be. Sound management, that beautiful clock we have in the corner, might have a very loud clicking sound that puts somebody off. Natural scents that we find very pleasant may be really overpowering to the point that it is distracting to a neurodivergent individual. And of course, adaptable lighting, meaning, maybe our light is a little bit too bright or too white, or the color temperature of the light hurts the eyes of the neurodivergent individual. We wouldn't know. How would we know? We think we've got lovely lights, lovely smell in the room, and the room is nice and quiet. So it's having those thoughts, learning and I guess doing the CPD that is outside our own frame of reference, Rory. So how might we enhance comfort with within the sessions?
Well, comfort is a big thing, isn't it? Because you've covered sound, environment, smell. So I think the starting position, if we want to be inclusive and have accessibility, that we build a therapeutic alliance and we're ethically and professionally responsible, is to have that in our initial reach out to clients. So some people send an information pack out, and if that is in the information pack, do you have any environmental preferences? If you're neurodivergent or autistic, please come back to me. Then you have a starting point, and it might be that some people don't like aftershave. I mean, it's not just people who are neurodivergent that might have difficulty with smells. It's also people with trauma. The smells can be very triggering. So one of the things is, a lot of therapists have these beautiful little bottles with 3 sticks in to make their room smell nice. We have them in the house; they're very nice. But to a neurodivergent person, that might be quite distracting and, in fact, quite distressing. Secondly, you mentioned lighting. I think that's so important. Some people really struggle with bright lights, and if someone's working in, in a kind of rooms that they hire, my experience has been, and certainly when I worked at the college and worked at the school and had my own private practice, they tended to be white lights. They didn't tend to be the kind of lights I have at home, which are kind of a different color temperature, which tend to be a bit brown. They tended to be very bright white lights, and very bright. So I think there's an adaptation. Dimmable lights, or in some cases turn the light off and just have a lamp. And I think also just where people sit. Is it a chair? Have you got like a sofa? I know some therapists have a sofa in the room, so people can find comfort, because you cannot have an effective therapeutic alliance if someone's uncomfortable. You just cannot do it, because they're focusing on their discomfort rather than engaging in what's going on for them. So there's a few starting points, Ken.
Thank you, Rory. And they really resonate with me. There's no secret. I was diagnosed autistic 7 years ago at the date of recording. So if you're listening far into the future, it may be more. And sound is a big thing for me. Interestingly, there is reasonable adjustments in the UK supermarkets. They have got certain times that are called quiet times, where they turn the lights off. And they don't turn them all off. It's not completely dark inside. What they'll do is they'll turn off the alternate aisle lights so that the lighting is greatly subdued. They stop the music, and there's usually less people in at that time. And they do that specifically for people that struggle with that sensory overload. I'm certainly one of them. Sound for me is incredibly overwhelming and invasive. So I struggle in a coffee shop or a restaurant or any of those kind of environments. I'm okay for a little while, but it's wearing on me all the time. And eventually I need to leave. So I carry around noise cancelling headphones for myself. So I'm basically making the adjustments for self, and I'll put the noise cancelling headphones on. So that's me with sound. Scents are a big trigger for me. If I go on a bus or on a train or walk through a crowded place and there's a lot of different perfumes, it actually burns my nose. It burns the top of my nasal passages where it physically hurts. And it usually puts me into a sneezing spree for a few moments. And that's just the natural sense around. One of the biggest challenges for me is if I have to travel by air, specifically going through the duty-free area, because there's usually massive perfume counters and people with little testers that they spray in the air or put on little sticks and ask people to smell them. I actually have to hold my breath and walk through there very, very quickly. And then for me on lighting, the lighting that doesn't work for me and that triggers me, gives me a headache, shuts me down and makes me need to leave a situation or place is this very white quartz lighting. It's the kind of lighting you would see in a jewelry shop. So if you go to a jewelry shop, you'll notice they've got these really bright lights. Why? Because they want you to see how sparkly the jewelry is. And the more it's reflecting the light, the more shiny it's going to look. That white, certain temperature in the quartz light, I just can't handle it for very long at all. And it makes me need to leave the area. And that's just me and my journey and how it is for me. So I can really resonate with these, but I know many autistic people struggle with not all, but many autistic people struggle with these same challenges. And it just, even everyday life, going to the shops is affected by this all the time. So to reach out for therapy with all the overwhelm you're facing in your life and actually have somebody who sees you, who acknowledges that from the very start of the relationship. Wow. That is, because I haven't experienced that. You know, when I went through my own training, Rory, and I had to do my own personal counselling, and then I've had times post my training where I needed to dip back into my own therapy for things that had come up for me in my life, and I was not recognized or given those options. And it's nice to see that this is now coming to light, that this information is being shared for the benefit of all. It's going to benefit the practitioner because we only want to serve and do our best, and it's going to benefit the neurodivergent individual who can now have an environment that is more suited to their needs, that is not attacking them. And I'm using that word because that's how it feels for me. The light attacks me, the sound attacks me, the scent attacks me. How can I be present in a therapy session and reach depths and really be there if I'm squinting my eyes because the light is making my eyes hurt? So this is such a really, really important topic, Rory. But I'm also mindful, you know, that when we're talking about sound, it might even be tone of voice or the communication style, Rory, that the therapist may use within the session. What can we learn about that?
Well, I mean, I think that's interesting. And just to rewind just a little bit, those who are working with young people, I think we have to acknowledge that young people's hearing is better than older people's generally. I mean, there are exceptions, and they can hear things that we can't. So I think possibly if you've got a room, get a young person in and say, what can you hear? And they may be able to pick up on things you can't. But it really is important. And in terms of tone of voice and communication style, it's really, really important that we adapt verbal communication to align with clients' preferences. It again comes back to inclusivity and accessibility. And some clients may appreciate a calm, monotonous tone, which they find easy to process, while others may want a more upbeat, expressive style. Now, no one's asking therapists to be voice actors or to be, or to go and retrain their voice to work with clients. That's not a reasonable adjustment. But just to think about how we speak to people, it might be we just have to slow down a little bit for some clients. And clients would usually tell you, in my experience, they may very well tell you. Some might not, but some might. If you have a very fast pace, if you have a very slow paced voice, which if I'm really honest, people who talk very, very slowly, I get quite anxious because I'm kind of hanging on the next word. That's one of my little idiosyncrasies. I start to finish the sentences off for them if people pause too long. And of course, what happens then is I'm not thinking about what's going on for me. I'm thinking about, I'm trying to help the person who's speaking out by finishing the sentences off. So we need to think about tone of voice, but I also think about communication in general. It needs to be really clear. We've talked about this in the podcast over the years about using clean language, and things like metaphor and simile may be very difficult for autistic clients. little things that we'd say all the time, like, well, we're all in the same boat. A lot of people listening to this might say, oh, we mean we're all in it together, aren't we? That's what that means. But actually, for an autistic person, they might think, well, where's the boat? What's this boat about? So we have to be, some autistic people, so we have to be very, very clear in our communication.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Very, very much so. And two areas I struggle with in communication is very soft voices, where I find that I need to really strain to hear. I'm almost leaning in, and maybe listening to this, maybe you can relate to a conversation you've had, maybe in a noisy environment where someone was speaking too soft, where you couldn't really fully understand everything they were saying. How did that feel for you? Certainly for me, I feel I'm really straining to listen and to grab everything, but I still miss things, and it's very difficult to respond then, because you're missing little pieces of that. And then the other side of the coin for me is when the voice is too loud. Certain people just have a really loud voice and way of communicating, and that's just how it is for them. And for that, it's almost like I feel I want to take a step back and be a little bit further away from that voice. And maybe you've experienced that listening to this as well. You don't need to be neurodivergent to have experienced these kind of things. But that communication, really important, how we communicate, and just checking it out with the client and seeing what is best for them. And then I think, it's great us speaking about all of this, but what are the practical things that you can do? And these are practical tips for implementation and peer collaboration. We like to always close on something you can do. And you can start off by auditing your practice environment, really having a look around your practice, and with the knowledge you've gained, kind of mapping that against what you have in your therapeutic room, and asking yourself questions. Is the lighting too bright? Does the clock tick loudly? Are there any strong odors present within my room? Seeking feedback from supervisors and peers and clients as well. You can ask your clients how they found your room, your environment, the communication methods, actually asking for that feedback. And if you are considering reasonable adjustments, so for example, within my home, I have dimmer switches on my lights so that depending on where I find myself, I can turn the lights down if I'm feeling particularly low points, as it were. If we key into spoon theory, which kind of you give yourself a number of points for the day. I use the word points, and I wake up every morning and I usually have 10 points. And when I experience a challenge, it goes down. And towards the end of the day is where I'm usually at my lowest. And sometimes I just need a really low light environment, and I'm able to use dimmer switches. So there's an area. You might consider getting fidget toys for somebody that maybe has ADHD. I'm going to leave the D out. I'm leaving the D out.
Take the D out.
And they may wish to fidget with this. One of the things is you might consider tax deductibility of those changes that you make within your room. And then another thing is wall decoration. There are certain wallpapers that for some or other reason make my eyes go funny, is the way I describe it. I don't know another way of describing it, but when I look at the wallpapers, it's almost like they start moving, and anything in front of it, I find it very, very difficult to focus my attention on. So if I was in a therapy session and the counsellor had behind them a really busy, distracting wallpaper design, I might find it really difficult to focus on that person, because my eyes keep on getting pulled to the lines and patterns on the wallpapers. Not all wallpapers. And that's just me speaking of my experience. And I realize every single neurodivergent individual is their own person, and you would need to speak to them. Any thoughts and final remarks, Rory, before we get on to the references for this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's always trying to be that best fit for a client and meeting the client where they're at. And there's no better way than having something like a 30-minute preliminary introduction session.
Oh, yes.
Where people can come to your office. So, you may very well, I mean, I think this is you have to have a universal approach to working with neurodiversity. So it should be on your listing, should be on your website, that you make reasonable adjustments. It should be when you're sending information out for this 30-minute preliminary meeting, can make reasonable adjustments and wait for any feedback. Whether that is, online or whether that is face-to-face in the room, there's different things we can do. And, obviously have a up-to-date picture of yourself on, a nice picture that's not been manipulated in Photoshop, just as he used to say, warts and all, and meet the clients. And it may be when you meet the client says, yeah, I think this works. Or they might go away and think, just don't like Rory's voice. It's a bit too loud, because I tend to be a bit loud. I'll go and find someone else. And you know what? That's fine. Yeah. That's really fine. Because we can't be everything for everybody, but we have to do as much as we can to make sure that we are offering a ethical service. And I'm going to come back as we come out of this kind of topic to say that it needs to be inclusive and have accessibility. It needs to be ethical and professional responsibility on our part to provide those reasonable adjustments. And unless we do that, we will not get an effective therapeutic alliance where we know that the therapy takes place and the magic happens.
What can you do? Well, you can go and get the super duper handout and the link to the in-depth article on the topic that Rory and I have discussed today. And the way you get that is by going to counsellingtutor.com. That's our mother website. Hit the podcast tab, and you're looking for episode 320 today. And on the episode 320, you'll see the show notes there, including a link to download the handout that Rory and I have been referencing, that was built by Rory's own hands, one of his super duper handouts. They're a super duper, Rory. And a link to an in-depth article on this topic as well. What else can you do? Well, if you're considering training to work therapeutically with autistic clients, Counselling Tutor do have a course. It's an in-depth course. How many hours is it, Rory? It's a lot of hours, isn't it? It's 40-odd hours of CPD.
Yeah, for about 40, 48, or 50.
Yeah.
My mistake,
Yeah, I think
50.
it goes over 50. And along with that, it's self-directed. So it's within our learning platform. It's really comprehensive. It's very well researched. There's a lot of input from neurodivergent counselors and individuals that have helped out with this training program. And there is also a live day associated to this. It's called an implementation day. And it's where we take all the theory of the course that you're learning and we help you by looking at how you can implement it and make the changes within your practice. So it's not just the information, it's the application as well. So that's working therapeutically with autistic clients. And if you're interested in that, just go to counsellingtutor.com, click on our products tab. It's right there for you. And that brings us to the end of Ethical Sustainable Practice today, Rory. And we kind of head into practice matters where I know many, if you listen to episode 319, last episode, you're going to be wondering what happened next. Because Susie was sharing about the complaints procedure, and I believe it's part 2 today, Rory.
It is. We left it on a bit of a cliffhanger on episode 319, where I interviewed Susie Jamieson on her journey, her individual journey of navigating the complaints process. And if you want to hear that, counsellingtutor.com, go to the podcast tab, find podcast 319, and you can hear part 1. In part 2, we will have the conclusion of Susie Jamieson's interesting, if not harrowing, story about navigating the complaints procedure, and this is what she told us.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
We welcome back Susie Jamieson for a part 2 of her interview on having a complaint made against her. Now, if you want to hear the first part of that interview, if you go to counsellingtutor.com, go to the podcast tab, go to episode 319, you'll hear Susie talk about the first part of the interview where she initially received a complaint. But in part 2, we're going to be looking more at the procedure and the aftermath of the complaint and where she is now. So Susie Jamieson, again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me again.
So in the first part of the interview, we spoke about the initial shock and the time taken to produce a defence against the complaint you had made against you. But in this part, we're looking really at the process ongoing. So just to recap, you received a complaint. You had to take a huge amount of time to write a cogent response to that complaint. You had a very difficult emotional time personally, and also you had to elicit support from supervision, your colleagues in the coaching world, and also you reached out to your insurance company, who provided you with legal assistance, and the point being made there was that make sure that if you have a policy, it has legal assistance written into it. And where we left it really was that you were going to go for something called consensual disposal initially, where you apologise to the client, and then hopefully that would be the end of it. But your legal advisor said to you, well, you've just spent a lot of time defending your position, and now you're going to have to say, well, I want to apologise anyway. And crucially, the sword of Damocles dangled over you, where basically you weren't sure if that apology would be accepted and it would be disposed of. So with that advice, you decided to defend your position. So shall we take it up there? How was that process of defending your position?
Relatively passive, because I'd written such a comprehensive initial response. The complaints go to what's called an independent assessment committee. So the complaint and the therapist's defence are documents these days are placed in front of a small panel of people who read and make a decision. And what they do is they look at the complaint, and the question is, if what the complainant is complaining about is found to be true, because at that point they don't fully know, and it equals a breach of the ethical framework or the professional standards, then allegations need to be put forward and we take the case to a hearing. So they do a thorough read of the documentation. And in my case, they proposed 3 allegations.
So they effectively upheld.
They're not upheld at that point.
So they proposed that there was 3. Okay. So
yes.
So now you've got 3 allegations against you, and they're obviously written down and cited. So
yes.
Where do you go from there?
That's where I went for a solicitor. I should have contacted my insurance company 6 months prior, but I didn't, and we won't go into that today. But my solicitor came on board and we put together a defence against the allegations, which was really not an arduous task because I'd done such a good job of defending myself in the first place. We just reiterated. That's really mostly what we did. And my solicitor was able to put in a little bit of legal stuff. And then you wait again.
And I we've discussed in part 1 of the interview that painful process of just sitting. And for those of you who can't see, because obviously this is a recorded podcast, but Susie's nodding, I would say I interpret it quite painfully at that.
Yes.
And then you just wait for an email or a letter. Where does the conclusion of it, I guess, arrive? Does it arrive in your email box or through your letterbox?
Always in your email. Everything's digital. You
Right.
have a digital cloud file with all the documents in, which you can access, and all the communication is done via email with attaching formal letters. And yes, I waited and waited and waited. And I'd like to give your listeners just a little bit of a trigger warning here. I am going to talk about suicide ideation. During 2021, in June and in December, I twice considered taking my life.
Gosh.
Because it felt like my best option. Now, that may sound incredibly, might think, well, I'm a bit of a diva or I'm catastrophizing, but we all know that working with our clients, certain things hit people really, really hard. This hit me very hard, but there are other reasons that I can't disclose that took me to a place of feeling I would actually be better off if I wasn't alive anymore. Mm. And it was my friends that got me through.
So I think one of the things that's coming out of certainly our conversations, both of them, is the absolute need for support. The amount of support mechanisms that you've had to put in place, your coaching, your personal therapy, your supervisor, your friends, speaking with your insurance company, all these seemed like kind of, to use a TA term, drivers to keep you above the water. Yes.
Yes. Except that they are very temporary in their respite. Yeah. They soothe you for a while and then you go down again. I did daily yoga, meditation, breathwork, EFT tapping, walking in nature, swimming in cold lochs. It still wasn't enough. Because you don't get the respite during the waiting. There is a lot of waiting. And I know that checks and assessments and decisions are a part of the process, but when you're on the outside looking in, it feels as if nothing's happening. And I know that something was happening. I know that. But what you want is a resolution, and that's not forthcoming. Checks and assessments have to be done.
So the three allegations that were kind of upheld at that point, you made a response to them, or not upheld, but were put to you. You made a response to them with legal support. Then there's the wait. So what happens next?
What happened next was we went into the next year, and all of a sudden there was just this flurry of activity, and a hearing date was set, and I was asked for, to get everything ready for the hearing, and that includes, interestingly, references from clients. Now, I do not think it is ethically appropriate to ask a client for a reference or a testimonial. And anyway, if they offer one at the end of their therapy, that's a different story. But to actually go and ask a client, could you give me a reference, please, I've been complained about. I mean, it just doesn't put my radar at all. Now, as I mentioned, I'm a coach, so I used my coaching clients as my gathering of testimonials, and I got some wonderful testimonials. You get a reference from your supervisor, a written account of how you work, how you make use of supervision. Like I say, I still have an amazing supervisor. There's a lot of paperwork to prepare, and you get yourself psyched up. And then in my case, the complainant decided that they pulled out. And so the hearing got cancelled. There was another bunch of factors as to why the hearing got cancelled. And you're just left. What happens next? You just go into another waiting.
Mm-hmm. So you're getting to the point where you think there's going to be an end to this, where you go to tribunal and you're going to place your information in front of them. There's going to be some sort of, I'm going to use the word judgment, because that's what it comes down to. Someone's going to make a decision on I guess the allegation, and then all of a sudden the complainant, who is the client, pulls out of the process, and there you are, not sure where you're at, not sure where you're going to go next, and left in limbo. So what did happen next?
What actually happened next was, in the June of that year, another independent assessment committee met. And the outcome of that independent assessment committee was that the case was dismissed without any charge or sanction.
I've just blown out air into my microphone, so I'm sorry if it's coming to your ears. That was the end of it. That was it.
Yeah, that was it. And to say that the shock of a case dismissed after 16 months was worse than the shock of the initial complaint, I cannot express what it was like that day to read case dismissed. I was a dreadful mess because I was so scared about opening the email, but my goodness, I was ragingly angry because so much damage had happened to me during those 16 months.
Yes. I mean, this whole process has been fascinating, especially, I guess, the getting references. I mean, you can get I guess they're looking for some kind of a character reference, and you could get those from a number of elements. You wouldn't have to go to your clients, but it does seem interesting that clients are mentioned. So it's completely dismissed. Had it not been dismissed, usually what happens in cases like this, there is a decision. If it had gone the opposite way and there'd been a decision, is there a right to appeal that decision?
Yes,
yeah.
There is. I do not know what the success rate is. I didn't get that far, but yes, there is a right to appeal. I mean, there was a right to appeal after the Independent Assessment Committee, the one about the charges, and the same happens if it goes to a hearing.
Mm. And usually what happens is there is a kind of scale, isn't there, of things that you may be asked to do. Not in your case, because it seems to me there was no case to answer, as the complainant pulled out, but sometimes it's referred to as sanctions. Just talk us through what a sanction is. What is a sanction?
So a sanction is probably a very soft and gentle punishment. So it could be something like you need to write a 3,000-word report about boundaries, specifically time boundaries, if you were complained about having poor timekeeping and that the complaint was ultimately upheld. So I don't think that the sanctions in themselves are particularly onerous. I think what upsets the therapist more than the sanctions, is the fact that they are then included in the public notices area of their membership body website, which basically means they're out there for the public to see you. And the reason that you're put there is because of the duty of care to the public. We have to make sure that our therapists are not harming the public. Now, there is a huge difference between somebody who is sexually inappropriate with a client and somebody, for example, I don't know, I saw a very benign one where a therapist had put some kisses on the end of a text. Now, I don't know the whole backstory, but I would suggest that the therapist who put kisses on the end of a text is not as harmful as forgive me for what I'm about to say, but a male therapist who showed his testicles to his client.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But everybody who is sanctioned is placed in the public notices area.
Yes.
And, to call back the gentleman that showed his testicles, he was then tormented by internet trolls and he became unsafe. I mean, I followed the story at one point on Google, and this is going back quite a few years now. Now, I'm not condoning what he did, but he then became unsafe and there didn't seem to be any protection for him.
When you say unsafe, in what aspect are you describing that?
He was being threatened.
Yes. And that's the difficulty, isn't it, of having information in the public domain. So, I mean, there is no justifiable reason for a man to for a male therapist to show their testicles in a therapy session. And clearly, when we talk of sanctions, I don't know what this particular therapist got, but I would imagine that they were probably struck off for that.
They get their license taken away, so they get their membership stopped. But because this isn't a legal process,
yes,
you know as well as I do, anybody can call themselves a therapist and take money for it. So you cannot be stopped from practicing, but you can no longer be a member of your membership body. And in a sanction like that, I would imagine very unlikely that another membership body would accept you.
And I think that's a useful time to pause and reflect on the structure of ethical bodies. So we've talked about this before in the podcast. There are 13 professional bodies here in the UK that people can join when qualified or as students and become fully qualified members of when they graduate. And they are under the umbrella of the Professional Standards Authority, which is a government organisation which effectively sets ethical standards, but it's sometimes called not ethical standards, but sets the environment for organisations to have things like complaints procedures, sanctions, and also I suspect it would influence the shape of maybe policy and ethical decision making. And it's my understanding, and please drop me an email if I'm wrong, that if you're removed from that voluntary register by one professional body, so say I was removed from my professional body, which is the National Counselling and Psychotherapeutic Society, when I came to apply for another ethical body, that register is held by the Professional Standards Authority, and they would know that I had been removed, and that might have an impact on whether I was taken on again. So that's kind of how it works. How you talk about 2021. So how has life, both professionally and personally, been since that day when you opened the email and there was no further action? How's life changed for you?
Oof. That's a whole other podcast. In a nutshell, there's been two shocking events since then. I mentioned that I had to take time away from work. Now, it wasn't just taking time away from work. As clients were coming to their natural end, new ones weren't coming to replace them. I can't explain that because I wasn't necessarily doing or not doing anything that I wasn't doing or not doing before the complaint came in. But I unfortunately ended up with some debt. I ended up with a substantial loss through loss earnings. And the complaint cost me, brace yourselves for this, cost me an eye-watering £88,000.
Just speak to that figure again.
£88,000. And the lion's share of that figure is lost earnings. So it's not money that came in and then had to get given out because you don't pay to go through a process. This is an unwanted side effect. Now, when I do the presentation about this subject, I do ask the audience what their financial contingency is for complaints, for illness, for somebody else's illness, for the loss of a contract, for all sorts of eventualities. I'm a single income household. I've recently just spent my life savings refurbishing the house I live in. Now, that makes me sound very, very wealthy. There is a complication with this house. I don't fully own it, but anyway. And so debt has to be paid. And the thing about debt is if you then are at risk of going bankrupt, so technically I was teetering towards bankruptcy because at the time the debt came to my full attention and I realised, it was a reasonable amount of money and I still wasn't earning very much. you're on the cusp of bankruptcy. And so I had to do anything to stop that from happening, because if you go bankrupt, you have to tell your membership body.
Yes.
And I just could not cope with the thought of another ripple effect of the complaint influencing my life in such a disruptive way. And I'm not saying that this is the cause of the complaint, and I've never held the complainant themselves responsible for anything that happened, and I still don't. But yes, it was a huge thing to have to deal with. And so I focused on making sure that I was debt free, and I am now. I cleared it within 7 months by a few miracles. But that contributed to my mum contributing. She gave me jewellery. I sold virtually all my jewellery. I sold an awful lot of my possessions. I sold family heirlooms to clear it all. And I can't put into words how shameful and heartbreaking actually admitting this is. It's, I'm struggling to speak because it's just so emotionally provocative.
Well, maybe if we just take a pause there, because you can hear the power of what you're saying just in your voice. Yeah. It's what you've talked about over the 2 interviews that we've done is a real insight into the human cost of having a complaint. For you as an individual, everybody's different, but for you as an individual. And I guess if professional bodies were sitting next to me, they would say that they have a duty to protect the public and act on complaints made against their registrants, and they have a policy and procedure which has been overviewed and is probably always under review as well. I think anything like that's always under review. They would say that, and the public need to be protected. In this case, it would seem that the cost to you is on a multiple of levels, both emotionally and financially. As we come to the end of this interview, what would you do differently now than when, if the same thing happened again, goodness forbid, what would you do differently? What lessons did you take away from this whole process?
Yeah, do you know, honestly, the only thing I would do differently is I'd phone my insurance company straight away instead of waiting. Yeah. The only thing I'd do differently, I would still produce a proficient preliminary response. Mm. I would fight my corner. Mm. I'm not a harm to the public on anybody's level. No. So I really wouldn't. And I don't think that you can do much different.
Why would you contact your insurance company first?
Because I didn't. I waited 6 months the first time around. So this, if it ever happened again, they'd be on my priority list for day one.
Okay. Supervisor. Was there a consequence to not contacting them directly?
Ultimately, no, but there was an uncomfortable conversation.
Why didn't you tell us when this happened? Yeah, I understand that. Susie Jamieson, it's not often that when I interview someone and I will say to them, thank you so much for your courage. I think this has been a very courageous act on your part to share your experience where some people would hide, maybe for very good reasons, in the shadows. You've spoken about complaints procedures and how it's had an impact on you. Now, this isn't the end of the story. For those of you who are listening, Susie has agreed to make a series of lectures in the Counsellor CPD library. So I'm guessing that at some point I'm going to be interviewing you again on the lectures you've made, and perhaps we can discuss a little bit more in detail. But just to bring it to a close, Susie Jamieson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rory. And I'd just like to close with one other thank you, and that is actually to the BACP. They listened to me and they have launched the member support service. So all future therapists, members of the BACP who are complained about, they now get access to emotional support.
Well, I mean, I think if there's anything to come from this, that's a very positive outcome, and one that shows that, at least in this aspect, your professional body listened, understood, and has taken action. And
Yes.
I guess we have to congratulate them for doing that. So again, Susie Jamieson, thank you so much.
Massive thank you to Susie Jamieson for being bold, sharing that entire journey with us in part 1 and 2. Thank you again to you, Rory, reaching out, finding interesting people to come and share stuff that is relevant to us and our counselling practices, and that was Practice Matters. We now move into Student Services. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Can't tell you how many times Rory and I have heard counselling students say that learning skills and knowing that they're using them effectively is really, really challenging. The reason for this is because we don't get to see another counsellor using skills in a real live session. In reality, this means that we're asked to learn something that we can never see demonstrated in a real setting, and it's no wonder that many of us are left feeling unsure. If you want to see counselling skills used in real sessions by qualified therapists, so this is real sessions, real presentations, and real use of skills, then go to counselingskillsacademy.com. There's some free videos on skills, including a full live session that you can have a look at. Gain the competence and the confidence of knowing you're using your counselling skills effectively. Just visit counselingskillsacademy.com. Student Services recognizing you on your formal journey to become a counsellor and or a psychotherapist. And today we're going to be speaking a topic that will be as interesting to our qualified colleagues as well. It's about the skill of challenge in counselling. We had a lot of questions about this, Rory, from our learners when we were training counsellors and psychotherapists. Tell us a little bit more about why is challenge so challenging? What is it?
Why is challenge so challenging? Well, I think it comes down to appropriateness and timing. I think it's those two aspects when you're working as a therapist, and like the skill of immediacy, they're usually the skills that they're really advanced counselling skills, and they're the ones that people tend to master later on in their training or develop as they move from being a student through into qualified life. And the skill of challenge is I think partly in its title. Challenge gives us the idea that it's confrontational, that we may go in a slightly authoritarian or aggressive posture towards our client, and it's nothing like that at all. Challenge is about, it should be called the skill of highlighting, in my view, sometimes highlighting inconsistencies. I will give you an example. Over the years, I've worked with a huge amount of clients who have been the survivors of abuse, and a not unfamiliar theme when you work with clients is they tend to blame themselves. How many times, and I'm sure there's lots of people listening to this who are probably nodding their heads as they're listening, where clients say, well, it was my fault, I did this, I did that. And, a challenge here is, this is not your fault.
Yeah.
That's the challenge. It's about bringing reality into the room, and also whilst being mindful. But that's a really good example of challenge. And it's also about incongruence. When someone's incongruent, sometimes it's useful just to put a little light on that, because we know that incongruence is part of why people come to therapy, because part of their authentic self, certainly in the person-centered movement, is saying one thing, but there's another part of them saying something else. And to be congruent is about bringing the client, two parts of that together, and getting congruent, for them to be congruent. In other words, to recognize their own process. And that's part of a therapist's job. So for me, the skill of challenge isn't about contradiction or aggressively challenge the client. It's just gently shining a very nice little light on things that are inconsistent, or maybe the reality of a situation a client finds themselves in.
Beautifully said, Rory. And you mentioned, that incongruence, and you link that into person-centered approach. But I'm mindful, how many times have we heard somebody say, my head's telling me one thing, my heart's telling me something different. It's the same kind of thing. It's universally known, that kind of feeling. I certainly have experienced it. So you don't have to be a person-centered therapist to recognize that incongruence within self. And I think that part of challenge is understanding what challenge is not. Because the word challenge and our relationship with the word challenge has been formed. We hold the frame of reference of what challenge is, and that's been formed through our life and when the word challenge has been used and what it's been linked to. So when we're speaking about challenge as a skill in counseling, it is not criticizing the client. Challenge should not involve telling the client they're wrong. It's crucial to avoid any language that may make the client feel criticized or put down. That is not challenge. And instead, of course, as you've said, Rory, the focus is on gently highlighting incongruences in their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The other thing about challenge is where it is used within the therapeutic journey, and challenging too early in the therapeutic relationship can damage rapport. We need to build that rapport, make sure it's been established, and so that the client knows that they're not being judged. There's no need for them to be defensive, that they're being held in unconditional positive regard. So then where is challenge appropriate, and where may it be missed by us as counselors and psychotherapists? And one of my favorite is colluding with coping mechanisms. So counselors should avoid mirroring a client's coping mechanisms, such as a nervous laugh when they're discussing a painful topic. Now, we're taught that to socialize, if I'm standing having a chat with you, Rory, and you start telling me a story and you go, and you start giggling like that, that I'm going to kind of mirror that. Even if it's not consciously, I might smile or giggle with you. We need to be really mindful, because very often making light of something or giggling is a response. It's a response, a coping mechanism that a client has. So they may be telling you about a painful experience that they have had, and they may giggle or smile or laugh through that. Challenge can be not laughing with them. And you haven't done or said anything. You're just not colluding with them on that. And then you might reflect back and you might say something along the lines of, that you've shared with me, I can hear the pain that you're carrying within that. But I couldn't help notice that as you were saying it, you were laughing. That is a challenge. It is a challenge. It's saying, I recognize the pain, but I see the incongruence of the laughter there. And that is that not colluding with those coping mechanisms. And then I think that one of the things we need to look at and separate out of the skill of challenge is challenge outside of the therapeutic relationship. So when the client maybe arrives late, the conversation we would have with them will be a challenging one, because we're going to maybe reinsert our boundaries. It is not a skill of challenge that you are using there. So challenge outside the therapeutic relationship, while addressing issues like lateness or substance misuse is important, these are aspects of practice management rather than therapeutic challenges. The focus should be on using challenges to facilitate the client's self-awareness and growth within the therapeutic relationship. So there's just that differentiation that we may have practice challenges. You came late, you missed your appointment, that kind of stuff, and separating that from the actual challenge as a skill within counselling, Rory.
Absolutely. And just to kind of rewind slightly back to the beginning of the podcast, if people are coming late, that can be a sign of AS, attention deficit, ADH. So we need to be thoughtful of that, and make sure, be curious why people come late or miss appointments. But in terms of what we're talking about now, which is the skill of challenge, you're absolutely right. Within the therapeutic relationship and during the arc of therapy, we have to be very, very thoughtful of how we use challenge. And sometimes some challenges can be a bit more hard hitting than others. I talked about shining a very small light on inconsistency. But in the past, and I'm sure a lot of therapists listening to this, both students and qualified colleagues, would recognise this, where you have someone who comes to you and they're talking about the hope their partner is going to change, and that if their partner could just change, and I'm sure if I wait long enough, my partner will change, and that can be just changing their value, the value system, or it can be something a little bit more pressing, such as them being violent or abusive. I've said on occasions, so what work is your partner doing? Is your partner in therapy to get him to change his violent outbursts, or working on his anger? And that question usually hangs like a palpable fog in the room. You can feel it, you can touch it, and you can see sometimes when that question's asked, the client sometimes goes, well, no. And then there's a pause while they realise that actually the only person who can change what's going on for them is them.
Wow. What a powerful challenge.
Yeah. And think about this little scenario of a client who comes to you and says that she has a very difficult relationship with her father because she had an affair when she was younger, 13 or 14, with an older man who used to give her cigarettes and alcohol and all sorts of things. And the therapist who says, so this older guy groomed you. And the client kind of looks at you, and the realization that the enmity of her father blaming her for having this relationship and saying that she's a person of loose morals isn't that at all. She was groomed. And we know that grooming can be very impactful on someone, and not blaming. It basically comes down to not victim blaming. You don't blame victims. You look for why that behaviour happened and what happened, and that can be very powerful. But I do think that before you use challenge, you're absolutely right, Ken. It's not a skill to be used in the initial openings of therapy, the first few sessions. And if you are going to use it, I think, and I still did this when I practiced, was to speak to my supervisor and say, this is a recurring theme that's coming up with my client. I'm thinking of challenging this way, and seeing where your supervisor comes back with. It's always good to check out a challenge, but I found it through my years of being a therapist, one of the biggest agents of change for clients, where they can actually see the truth of their situation. They have to confront it. We talked about earlier about people being comfortable in therapy. It is uncomfortable when you have to look at yourself and what you can do to change your situation as a client, as I have, and I'm sure you have in therapy, Ken, and say, actually, this is about me. It's not about the other person. It's about me and my behaviour and my view of the world. And Carl Rogers summed it up beautifully in A Way of Being. There's in A Way of Being, his last book. He said, experience for me is the highest authority. It's not the parables or Freud. It's to my own experience that I return to again and again in the process of becoming. And that's always, I find that on quote sites all the time. But if you read to the bottom of the page, I wish they'd put the proper flipping quote in. If you read to the bottom of the page of that, page 20, I think it is, it says, my experience is infallible. Therefore, it needs to be checked in new and primary ways. And there lies the skill of challenge, that someone's view of the world is infallible. It's my lived experience. But in some cases, it's not an accurate view of the world. And a therapist's job is to kind of just explore that a bit. Is your view of the world actually accurate? And just to test that out. So that's my view on challenge. It's a very nuanced skill and one that needs to be used with great care.
Yeah, and a very powerful skill. And you've used some great examples there, Rory, and I'd like to throw in some more examples of therapeutic challenge. So highlighting incongruence between words and emotions. A client comes in, you say, I wonder how you are today as you're coming into therapy. And you can see that they are visually showing as being really uncomfortable, really low. They're not presenting as you normally see them. And they say, well, you know what, I'm fine. I'm just fine. We might challenge there. Pointing out discrepancies between past statements and present actions. And this doesn't always lie in a negative, but you said that and now you're doing this. It can be a positive. So maybe a client, when they were speaking at some stage within their therapy, says that such and such would be impossible for me. But then they reach that stage, which is a moment of celebration within therapy. You know, we want to celebrate with our clients when they do have those breakthroughs. We might reflect back and say, you know, I just can't help remembering when you said that something like this would be impossible, but yet here you are and you've achieved it. That is challenge. You're bringing what they said before, I can't do that, and showing, look, you've done that. And within that challenge, there is potentially further growth, and helping clients understand their coping mechanisms. You know, we've spoken about inappropriate laughing when pain is there. It is a coping mechanism, and by gently challenging, there's the word, you know, that can be seen. And then, Rory, an area that is very well known to you, trauma. I know you built an amazing course, Trauma-Informed Practice, for Counselling Tutor. If you're interested in training as a trauma therapist and trauma-informed practice, go and look at counsellingtutor.com. It's right there. It's addressing disassociation in trauma-informed work. Using grounding techniques can bring a client back to the present moment, and it can be a form of challenge. Helps the client differentiate between the past trauma and the present safety, facilitating their healing process. So it's interesting that there are so many applications of challenge, and it really, as I think the word you use, Rory, is nuance. And you've mentioned person-centered therapy, and of course challenge is used across all therapeutic modalities. Person-centered, we've already kind of covered that, but in CBT, challenging a client's unhelpful thoughts and behaviors is a central aspect of CBT. You're going to see it there. Gestalt experiments like the empty chair technique, where the clients dialogue with different aspects of themselves, are having those are forms of challenges. Transaction analysis. Counselors may challenge clients to identify which ego state they're in, whether it's parent, adult, child, that they're operating on, and then maybe ask them if they think that that's the healthiest place to be responding. You know, it's challenge. It crosses across all of the different modalities. And of course, then when we speak about online therapy, managing practice boundaries, online setting may require more frequent challenges related to practice management. Now, we have said that's not necessarily a skill. It's going to sit separately. But addressing potential for disinhibition. The anonymity of an online therapy can lead to increased client disinhibition, which might require more direct challenges to maintain the therapeutic boundaries. So disinhibition being that somebody might give too much information too early within the therapy session, maybe go away and go, oh my goodness, I can't believe I told all of that stuff to that stranger that I've just met, and be left with heavy feelings. You know, we may as therapists step in and challenge and say, you know, I get that you have all of that you're looking to share, and I wonder if we might just come back into the here and now, and you know, you kind of steer them away from oversharing too early. So a lot of thought around challenge. It's a deep dive, I think, that we've done today, Rory, on challenge. It is challenging. It is to be used with care, but it is incredibly powerful when challenge is used appropriately at the right time within the arc of therapy, it can be incredibly effective. It really can. Wow, so much.
Yeah, it's an agent. It's a change agent. It is a change agent, but one that has to be administered appropriately when the relationship is sound enough to withstand it. I think that's my closing observation. The relationship needs to be able to withstand the challenge, and that probably isn't going to be in the early stages of it. So, but yeah, as you rightly say, Ken, an important skill, and one that is, in my experience, is a terrific agent of change for the client to look at their experience and say, yeah, actually, is that the correct is that correct, or is there something else that I need to bring into it? And that's what counselling is about. It's the essence of counselling, really, to look at self and to be able to be honest with self. And sometimes the challenge helps with that self-honesty. It really does.
There it is. That is Student Services. We're so grateful that you joined us for episode 320 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. The National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, or NCPS, proudly sponsor this podcast, supporting students every step of the way. Join the NCPS for resources, training, and a friendly, knowledgeable community to enhance your learning experience. Visit ncps.com.
Yes, we started off with ethical and sustainable practice, and we talked about preparing the counselling environment for autistic-friendly care or neurodivergent-friendly care. We live in a world where neurodivergence has come of age, and people are asking for reasonable adjustments, and that's what we discussed in that section. In Practice Matters, the concluding part of the interview with Susie Jamieson on her journey through navigating the complaints process, part 2. And just a little reminder, if you want to listen to part 1, counsellingtutor.com, podcast tab, episode 319, and you'll hear the beginning of Susie's story. And I can let you into a little secret. Susie has actually recorded a lecture on navigating the complaints process. It will be in our CPD library in the next couple of months, and I'll be interviewing her on that and what the lecture contains. So that's really exciting stuff, and one that's supportive to the therapeutic community. And finally, in student services, the challenging skill of challenge, how to use it, when to use it, and what the agent of change it brings when it is being used. And finally, thank you to all those people who have taken the time to share our podcast to their peers or their colleagues, because we know that people say when they hear our podcast, that can be really helpful. So please share it widely on your social media, or pop it into an email if there's something that you've heard that my colleague might be grateful of that. Pop it into an email. And also, if you feel so inclined, give us a review on iTunes or whatever podcast platform you use. We like reading a nice review. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.